Chapter 15. John Joseph at the Enduro races. When John Joseph and his mega wealthy cronies founded the Southern Football League 4 years ago, he was regarded as a hero in Mississippi. The original 8 billionaires had unveiled a daring business plan. They reasoned that upstart sports leagues failed because they originated in the largest markets and therefore choked off the most lucrative expansion sites. The Great Eight recognized the passion for football in the American South and agreed to start in the land of cotton and to later expand to places like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. The Mississippi Christmas Elves, John Joseph's franchise, had won 3 of the first 4 league championships and now fielded what was believed to be one of the best professional football teams ever assembled. Everyone knew the SFL owners could and would dig deep into their pockets to procure talent from the established league. But even John Joseph's cronies underestimated how far he would go to maniacally purchase gifted players. 4 years ago, 8 expansion teams competed for the first SFL championship, a championship ultimately claimed by the Christmas Elves. Synchronous with this milestone, another expansion team vied for its first major victory. The Joseph-funded American Eclectic Party used clever media manipulation and boatloads of cash to win elections where only 22% of the adult population voted. It was a giddy era. John Joseph had decided on a secular Christmas motif for his football team, and the home crowd dressed as Santa Claus and toy shop elves and reindeer. The week before the election, the Eclectic Party candidates dressed as St. Nick, and this struck a chord with the foghead electorate. On the Sunday preceding the Tuesday election, the Christmas Elves were scheduled to play the Alabama Steelers in what would be the genesis of a bitter rivalry for years to come. Before the game, John Joseph mused aloud that the fate of the Eclectic Party rested on the vagaries of a football team. The Christmas Elves won their game with dramatic flair, defeating the Birmingham Bad Boys, as they had been nicknamed, on a last-second field goal. 2 days later, the Eclectic Party captured 28 of 52 Senate seats and 70 of 122 House seats. A popular news site posted a cartoon of Santa Claus yelling, "Ho, ho, ho." The caption read, "The shout heard around the world." Ultimately, the Eclectic Party would be a house divided by its very composition. About 60% of the victorious eclectics belonged to the progressive wing, the coalition supported by John Joseph himself. In principle, the progressives were more libertarian than progressive as the word had traditionally been defined. But the ever-contentious John Joseph competed for everything, including the use of certain words. He insisted that most people who labeled themselves progressive should be referred to as retrogressive or destructive. "What is so progressive about decline and fall?" He declared that the word progressive was too good for certain people and that he would vie for its usage. The eclectic minority was composed of Greens and hyper-independents. They frequently voted with the established parties. Meanwhile, the progressive agenda included things like school vouchers, purchasing low-priced homes for public housing residents, and reducing incarceration in general. They failed to get most of their measures out of committee, and when they did, they ran up against a capricious legislator and a veto-happy Republican governor. John Joseph and Martin DeVries were now convinced that the only way to get things accomplished was to control both the State House and the governor's office at the same time. Mississippi law stipulated that if no gubernatorial candidate compiled 50% of the vote, the legislature would settle the election. So, in a three-way race, the best way to win the governor's office was to win the state house 4 years earlier. The big wheels, the GOP and the Democratic Party, agreed on one matter in the absolute. There was no room for a viable third party in America. None at all. The two major forces joined a long list of entities who had underestimated the Joseph family. Now, both groups were determined to crush the political baby before it could stand upright. In the years following the Mississippi sneak attack, the D's and the R's rallied their grassroots like never before. The GOP crisscrossed the U.S. with web pundits and radio hosts to perform fundraisers and stomp speeches for Mississippi offices once thought too small to joust over. The Dems countered with their own shills from Hollywood and Silicon Valley. The big deuce was still the big deuce. Now, the two-headed monster was returning with reinforcements to the Fort Sumter of this unwelcome political movement. They funneled in campaigns from all over the globe. Political ads filled billboards, the airwaves, the internet. Not since the days of John Brown and William Quantrill had so many outsiders tried to influence one state's elections. Retired colonels and televangelists campaigned for the surly Robert Black. Movie stars and rappers campaigned for the effervescent Sean Mannion. The eclectics, led by John Joseph, fought gallantly for the feisty Eva Marie Taffy. At the Cherokee Speedway in Okolonga, Mississippi, John Joseph served as Grand Marshal for the first ever encore finale of the 3/8 mile ovals racing season. The track had wrapped up its regular season 1 week earlier with the traditional 100 lappers in each category, followed by the annual Demolition Derby. Now, on this heavenly autumn day, the racetrack hosted the Eclectic Party's first ever political Enduro races. The master of symbolism had once been the most popular man in Mississippi for bringing professional football to the state. Since then, his rivals had crafted a backlash based on the false decline of high school and college football in the Magnolia State. Joseph was painted as a Yankee imperialist, a carpetbagger, a fat cat capitalist trying his utmost to crush the innocent world of amateur athletics. For this reason, John Joseph had decided against further using his mighty yells as a political instrument. On the Saturday before the election, John Joseph was emphasizing Enduro racing. John Joseph was noted for photogenic entourages. Often, he mingled with actors who would be starring in a soon-to-be-released Joseph production. He was frequently seen with heads of state and captains of industry, and he was always photographed with beautiful women. Today was no exception. With all the hubbub surrounding the election, today would be the rollout of his new public companion, the heart-stopping blonde who called herself Amber Wave. Amber Wave's real name was Amber Wayne, but she was testing the waters of legally changing her name. John Joseph was against the name change, stating that it sounded like a name one would hang on a porn star. But now that John Joseph had an aversion to being seen with porn stars, but he seemed to have other plans for the image of a young lady who just last year captained the MIT women's basketball team. At 6'3", the springy mathematician was almost a foot taller than her escort. John Joseph's choice in women had once more provided the media with fodder for psychoanalysis. Seeking the camera's warm glow, John Joseph seated his entourage at the top of the bleachers instead of the booth. He had chosen to wear maroon and white, the colors of the Mississippi State Bulldogs, and he rounded up an Ole Miss sweatsuit for amber with the school logo obliterated with duct tape to avoid a trademark controversy. Seeking a more family-oriented theme than he sometimes projected, John Joseph flew his mother and father in from Wyoming. James Joseph had never shared his son's passion for auto racing. His sport was horse racing, and today he dressed in a white suit and bolo that suggested a roly-poly, clean-shaven, post-LASIK Colonel Sanders. His Swiss wife adorned herself in a scarlet designer dress more suited for the red carpet than the dusty bleachers of a backwater racetrack. Fearing that the weather might turn cold, Geneva Joseph wrapped herself in a black seal coat. The photogeneity of her rich lady off her meds look would compete mightily with the stunning blonde and two of the world's most famous men. John Joseph had hoped to get the race on TV or cable or satellite, but we would have to settle for a webcast. Even the chairman and majority owner of several networks had trouble juggling broadcast schedules that were made months in advance. And of course, John Joseph was cautious of mixing profits and politics. He did it routinely, but he always did it gracefully. There was a rigid protocol that surrounded such matters, and a hasty assembled display of political theater would have to sink or swim on its own merits. The not yet organized sanctioning body had formulated 3 classes of Enduros: golf cart, powder puff, and litter box. Golf carts were cars with four-cylinder engines and all electric vehicles. Any car driven by a woman was assigned to the powder puff division. Litter boxes, referred to originally and unofficially as shit boxes, were any man-driven car of 6 or more cylinders. On today's card, it had been decided that the top 10 finishers from the first 2 races would be allowed to compete in the litter box division. As yet, there were no serious corporate sponsors of Enduro racing. Emphasizing political themes with certain proscriptions, cars lacking political messages were placed at the rear of the starting field. Cars with overt political messages lined up in the front of the pack. Cars with taboo slogans and signs were not allowed to compete. The white power Chevy, the nigger suck Mazda, the dead Muslim Ford, and the fuck the law Pontiac were escorted from the premises. The GodHatesFags.org affiliated Ford had read the rules a little bit closer and changed their body display to a concise God Hates gold lettering on white background. They were allowed to compete in the litter box division. 91 4-cylinder cars and 5 electrical cars turned the 3/8 track into a parking lot. 5 laps into the 100-lap race, the red flag and red lights were displayed. Every car stopped in its tracks. 7 drivers and 7 smashed cars gave the thumbs up sign. They were instructed to remain in their cars, and the race was restarted a few minutes later. On lap 12, the red flag and red lights reappeared. One of the 5 crashed drivers needed assistance, and the safety crew untangled him from the crushed metal. The race officials took the opportunity to remove the other drivers from the lap 5 and lap 12 accidents. A mangled steel cocoon was peeled from the driver of LoseWeight.AskMeHow.com, and his plenteous body was loaded onto a stretcher. Flat on his back, he waved to the crowd, and they responded with a thunderous standing ovation. The ambulance left with lights flashing and siren wailing, and the race continued. 84 cars restarted the race and a narrative developed. Earlier, when the blind draws were announced, boos and catcalls rained down and John Joseph cringed. Yes, most of the political slogans were sympathetic to the eclectics and their candidates, but it looked fishy for Vote Eclectic to win the pole position, flanked by Taffy for governor on the outside. The red and green and silver and white and gold Vote Eclectic, driven by a house painter named Ezekiel Johnson, held to its lead but was challenged by the Semper Fi Toyota. No one knew the drivers, but everyone knew the slogans. When the green on green, go green electric.org Watt wagon flipped on its back, the crowd went crazy. When the driver was removed from his crushed vehicle and it was announced that he was to be taken to a local hospital for observation, they booed and hurled insults at the man on the stretcher. On lap 48, there was an extended delay so the wrecker crews could remove the 37 metal carcasses that now obstructed the track. Stalled drivers were allowed to exit their vehicles, and the wreckers hastily dragged the carnage to the infield. There were, of course, a few flubs. Laughter drowned out the tow truck motors as one wrecker removed an active car and deposited on the scrap heap, with the driver protesting by banging his hand on the car's top. He would spend the rest of the race in the infields, surrounded by slabs of broken steel. The scrum had grown into a race with Vote Eclectic and the icon-drenched Semper Fi lapping the field and exchanging leads. On lap 72, the Abortion Kills Chrysler, white with dripping blood lettering, slowed down as if to let the faster cars pass. But on curve number 1, he executed a perfect kamikaze maneuver that sent the Semper Fi into the guardrail, where he would be instantly T-boned by Vote Eclectic. With the 2 leaders gone, Abortion Kills' unofficial teammate, the blood red and white lettering "Fetuses Are People Toyota," was launched into second place. The lead was held by Arkansas native Joe Hall, a 42-year-old hobby car veteran and proprietor of Joe's Garage, the sponsor of his ride. Considered an unthemed vehicle, the old Ford had started in 71st position and slithered all the way to the front of the survivors. The meticulous website recreations displayed on every surface were now scraped and scratched beyond recognition. Only the 71 magnetic transponder mounted on the roof of the cab informed the judges of its identity. Joe Hall would hold the lead until late in the race. On the 91st lap, his front tire unraveled. Driving on the rim, he was able to swerve and waver and block the passage of the Fetuses Are People Toyota. The 2-car gridlock allowed the surviving field to catch up with them, and on the 95th lap, the flaming pink on lavender Gender Freedom Honda found enough daylight on the backstretch to take the lead. Christine Marshall, the former Jason Marshall, the divorced airline pilot and father of 2 sons, had threatened litigation should he not be allowed to race in the Powder Puff division. But track officials parroted the position of the state of Mississippi. Christine Marshall was legally a male, regardless of what a doctor might have done to him. The track announcer declared Christine the victor, but made obvious references to his manhood. "Let's give this man a big round of applause. The man behind the wheel, the man of the hour." The crowd gave Christine a warm reception, and on his victory lap he stopped on the backstretch and waved to a dozen androgynous fans in pink blazers who jumped on the flimsy wooden bleachers and chanted "Gender Freedom" until Marshall finally left the track. The blue skies of autumn provide the perfect backdrop for the Joseph family as they shook hands and signed autographs between races. John Joseph had recruited a musical melange of has-beens, retreads, overlooks, and never-beens to perform between races. Hungry performers frequently did freebies for Joseph in hopes of landing a gig in one of his resort lounges, or to perform the theme of one of his movies or TV or web shows, or to grab at their last chance for a recording contract. The selected songs did not embrace a political hard sell, but the performers did nag at the audience to vote on Tuesday. Between handshakes, John Joseph checked selected text messages. He was pleasantly surprised at the number of viewers. The powder puff race was marred by red flags and was ultimately won by a 51-year-old grandmother named Margot Hainsworth of Chattanooga, Tennessee. She drove the green-on-black privatized currencies Toyota. The crowd gave her a tepid reception on her victory laps, but she charmed them in her public address interview when she praised Dumont transmissions. The idea of competing currencies was too obscure even for this free market crowd, but fishing for a sponsorship was a maneuver they respected greatly. The main event was anticlimactic. The promoters allowed the top 10 powder puffs and the top 10 golf carts to race with the litter boxes and to line up at the front of the pack. There were too many cars on the track, and the gridlock never thinned out enough to convey a sense of speed. The traffic jam would ultimately be won by a to-be-won Ask Me entry whose Ford was adorned with all sorts of cryptic symbols. Jeff Hagedorn had initially been declared unthemed, but was moved near the front of the pack following a secret meeting of track officials and prominent citizens. Pleased to be blessed with perfect lighting, pleased to be seen helping his mother and then his father ascend and descend the bleacher steps, pleased to be seen mingling with common folk as he breathed wholesome American auto exhaust, John Joseph smiled at the success of the unfolding spectacle. The eclectics would carry the blue-collar vote. He was sure of it. But he also knew that tomorrow's football game would be viewed by a larger and more diverse audience. A win might not improve even Marie's chances on Tuesday, but if the Christmas elves lost to the feisty Arkansas presidents, the fallout could be disastrous. The final race concluded shortly after dark, and a fireworks show was offered to stagger the outflow. As the weary Joseph entourage sat and dutifully viewed the pyrotechnics, most of the stragglers pushed to get closer to the celebrities and to snap their photos. When the fireworks concluded, there were still a few hundred people staring at the Joseph family, a handful of eclectic candidates and their families, bodyguards and infomercial star Chadwick Burles, an assortment of technicians and assistants. Suddenly, Amber Wave stood up and attempted to lead the assembled in cheering. "Who's going to win?" Most of the crowd said elves. A few said presidents, and a few said Arkansas. Much to Amber Wave's disappointment, no one said Taffy.